Okay, Saturn. This is probably the fifth or sixth one I've done, and he's actually mentioned in quite a few of the ones that I've done here recently. And because I'm not like playing around anymore, and I'm going to go ahead and let people know I'm not just coming out and blurting it out. I still want you to find things, and I want you to look through these, and I want you to realize where it comes from. I want you to look up the information and see the correlation that I see. You can look at ancient works of Philobablos, Sanchuniathon, all these ancient historians that were around during that time, and you can find truths in it, but you also find that these Romans, they always had allegory for everything, and in that allegory, there's a few little strands of truth, and it's usually, in fact, always pretty much not as grandiose as they make it out to be, and not as innocent or not as holy would be a good word as they make it to come out to be. It's just kind of the way things go down, but then they write a story around it that puts a twist on it. And because they're great dramaticists in writing stories like that. And also, if you've studied Greek and Roman lit, they of course compiled themselves together, knowing that they were talking about the same gods of the same area. And if you look at them, they're not even worshiping gods from their exact area that they're in. They're worshiping the gods of the known world. And in fact, there's a statement made 200 BC or so by somebody who said that they came to Rome and they said, and looking at Athens, I believe it was, is where they were at, and they were looking at all the gods that they had. And he basically said, it looks like you're worshiping other people's gods. And he goes, we're worshiping the gods of the world, the primordial ancestors that started everything. And then they just walk, so it's like, what? And the guy's just like that. I believe there's a mention of something just like this also in the story of Asclepius, whenever Hermes Trismegistus is explaining the way the things go to him. But anyhow, there's a lot of symbolism and stuff that you find, and I studied symbolism, and I've done it for years and everything, and it helped me whenever I was doing Dungeons and Dragons to put certain epitaphs together and things, and keep people with a vision of what they were looking at. And I used a lot of pictures and iconography, and even used this one time. And this picture on the left, you can see that he's wrapped up or coiled in this snake. This is the incredible snake of time. This is which turns into a circle of time, which looks a lot like the zodiac on the picture on the right. Interestingly enough, back then they had this whole egg thing of the world. The world had been hatched out of an egg. An egg always has the egg, the yolk, and everything into it. We were supposedly living in a egg type atmosphere where the outer shell of the egg was the firmament. The inner part, that's albumin, that's the clearish stuff, is our air, and then we're living on that planet that's the yolk in the middle, if you will. That's what they saw it as. And you look at the eggs of everything, and that we were on an egg somehow, that a primordial egg had started the whole universe, and it has to do with his wife and stuff. If you notice, though, this snake is, it's with him and all that, but also doesn't it look binding? And isn't that a constrictor, a controller, a choker, if you will? Snake worship goes back to way primordial times. People, just to break it down real quick, I guess, people had snake worship for a long time. They realized snakes shed their skin and continue to go. Whenever they looked old and dead, that they would shed their skin. There was an ancient belief that they could live forever. Like the cat had 9 lives, a snake could primordial live. This is the reason for the ring of the snake that keeps going. People had taken and put, and they went and found a destroyed area from a long time before, from a time before them, and it had been vanquished. And they had a bunch of urns around. And when they were opening up one of the urns had a snake in it and a snake skin. And they thought it had happened. I mean, it could have happened 20, 15, 10 years ago, but they didn't know. And they thought this thing had been in here since God knows when, and it's still alive. That's just one example of snakes. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the snake actually eats the primordial plant of life that's supposed to give you, the the not immortality, but actually make you young again to where you can live forever if you keep eating that plant. The snake ate the plant, and as it walked off, it shed its skin. This shows the last remnants of snake worship, which really isn't a last remnant situation because you see it still in iconography everywhere, but people aren't putting so much boom on the snake anymore. But it's that serpent of old, and it's in the constellations and shown as that giant serpent that runs through. And originally there was two, and one destroyed the other. Tiamat had destroyed Bahamut, and Bahamut has to do with Baphomet. It's the other people's name for it. Baphomet is the origin of baptism, where the god Ea cleanses you and stuff, which is really just pretty much a bath, which is also comes from Baph for Baphomet. And Baphomet, you find that the ancients knew was twisted into Sophia. Sophia was the goddess of knowledge and wisdom. She was the mother goddess, and in fact, philosophy is the love of wisdom, where philo is love and wisdom is Sophia, philosophia. But let's look at this iconography here. He's always shown here with a lion and a bull and a man, and then the snake iconography that goes with him, and you can see all kinds of stuff in this. Of course, he's standing on what would be the symbol of man down here, so this is whenever he started, and then 2 zodiac zones later becomes the lion, and then way up here becomes the zodiac of the bull. And he's supposed to have been this regenerative God that comes around again, and it takes much longer for his cycle to go through. And so he was known as the Ancient of Days. He's Father Time, and these type of things. In the Canaanite area, he wasn't known by the Roman and Greek names of Chronus and Saturn that everybody's familiar with, but he was known by El, or Elis. Well, the Romans always take us and put it in the end, or on the end of a name, and it gives them the deity. So whenever they say Elis, it's really El. When they say Chronus, it's really Chron. When they say Saturnus, it's really Saturn, and so on. Saturnus Mons is the original capital hill of Rome, and the original super god of their worship that everything had come from. That his father Uranus had had them captive for a while, but they had broken free. But the ones that broke free were the Titans. This is one of the Titans, in fact, the major of the Titans. And if you'll remember, he was the one that ate all of his kids, except for the storm god, Zeus, who came back and avenged him, and it ended up taking over. And of course, they act like, that he ate him, and then he got all the other gods out of him, back out of his stomach. But what later happened was other people were deified in the area. There's an area known as Sidon, right down there. It's still that place today. It's just near Baalbek, and it's on the edge of the Mediterranean. And that's Sidon, the sea god, and who is equivalent to Ceres, and which is a sea god of corn. And Sidon is known as cornbread, and which back then they didn't have corn over there, of course. Everybody gets corn. Well, how do they have corn? Because it's in South America. Corn was any grain, and if you'll look at how the grains look on a wheat and things, they kind of look like a corn thing growing up. So it was really grains. And so Ceres, and that's where we get the word cereal from. And also cereal can be a grain or a food, but also cereal can be something that happens over time repeatedly, like this zodiac that you see here. So he's also shown carrying this staff, which makes him as a shepherd. Behind his head, though, conspicuously, is a big egg, if you can see it, right there. And it's got a cobra snake on it, Egyptian cobra snake looking thing, with a big egg behind his head. And then you see the coils behind his head, too, wrapped around to where she's wrapped around that. And their original idea is that this primordial goddess, that he was the, Uran was the air, or heaven, and in fact On is looked at as being heaven for the Sumerians, the Aryan people, and On was heaven, and once he got pierced and killed, or they had the story of being castrated, which would have been cutting a hole in heaven, that it released the flood. and that had happened in the places that are showing his iconography, the man, the lion, and again in Taurus, the bull. Well, in the Bible, it only mentions the giant flood that would happen back here at 10,500 BC that he's standing on as being the flood that was around Taurus or before. And it seems odd, or it would have been the Leo flood, because then they come into Taurus with the bulls and get taken out of Egypt and everything. I'm sorry. So, doesn't show the same lineage. There's an odd thing, too, that if this story about promising that there wouldn't be a flood anymore by the gods, there was another flood or two, and that's probably why these people started running away from their God, because he lied, apparently, because it flooded out again. Well, anyhow, let's look into this a little bit deeper. But so we went through Taurus, and then that was the times of the bull, and then you can see that it went from that to Aries, and everybody went to killing goats and doing things like that, and a lot of goat worship. In fact, that's the point. It shows zodiacally is whenever Moses comes down, and even though he has horns, by the way, you can look it up, Moses with horns, Google image it. Even though he comes down with horns, and that is Baal worship, and Yahweh is also a cow god too. They've got pictures of Yahweh and his Asherah and so on now that they have found, and so he's married to a woman who ends up being like this same type of woman, and then the disgusting thing would be that would be his own mom type of thing. Once his father died, he married his own mom. Strange stories like this too go through where he had married Rhea, his own sister, right? And then, strangely enough, you find Abraham, who supposedly married his own sister. And you find in the Bible where once it seems like what they're trying to do is equate it to Cronus and this guy here. And of course, in the story, he sacrificed his own son. And even back in the old times of Philobablos and Sanctuathon, they actually said, can't anybody see that that the Hebrew Abraham and stuff is not just a mockery of and or a copy, or basically he was saying stolen story of this god here, Saturn, and in fact the ancient symbol of time, so they're putting Chronos on Abraham, was the same ideogram graph that he used in the ancient language. And so they said he's equating these two. And then he tries to sacrifice his son Isaac, but the angel stopped him. Who can see that that's not mimicking the fact that this God here had sacrificed his own son named Eudid. And they say Eudid, even in Phoenician through that day there where he's talking, still means only begotten son, and that he had sacrificed his only begotten son. And I'm like, only begotten, let me look into this. Well, I find that there's a DS thing that people have with their languages, and they change it whenever you go from Phoenician to areas around there, that there's a change. There's also an S and an R change, an S that has an SH and one that doesn't, going into Persia and Hebrew, where their S usually has a sh instead of an s, just a straight sound, as in Shamash or Chemosh, or Shatan is Satan instead of Satan. Or so anyhow, and that, by the way, equates to this. Let me get through this, and I'll put it for a full circle and give you quite a reveal here. But in this picture, he's standing on fire. I don't know if you see that, but also his daughter was supposed to have ended up being the essence of fire. Her name is, oh man, what is it? Shekinah. Shekinah. And black people embrace this and say it's this and that and everything. And that's actually whenever they used to worship fire. And Shekinah is the goddess of fire. And and she marries this guy in that. Also, look, he's wearing angel wings. One thing I haven't mentioned yet. And he is carrying the torch of fire, the light bearer. So you see all of this iconography that's pulled in through him, right? So let's look at something here. Let's look at Saturn is the sixth planet from the sun and second largest planet in their solar system. Y'all know that, after Jupiter, which is the largest. Saturn is named after the Roman god Saturn. All the Roman gods, Mars and all that, end up being our planets and everything, which actually was Aries. Anyhow, it's equated to the Greek Chronus, the Titan father of Zeus. Also the Babylonian Ninurta. the ancient Sumerian god who was a god of grain and turned into the god of war. Right? Okay, so this starts to pull that Sumerian thing in and how ancient this is. And the Hindu god Shani does the exact same thing. And of course, this is through this whole area, so people might have this same primordial thoughts. Anyhow, Saturn's symbol represents the Roman god sickle, and it kind of looks like a 5, and it's got that loop down at the bottom. And at the time, he had a sickle, looks just like the Russian sickle. And everybody shows him with the giant reaper sickle, too, signifying the father time situation. But the other grain sickle is what is really common with him because of the god of grain, and of course that becomes the sickle that's the sickle of Father Time, and of course, that's the boatman Charon that takes you to hell, and it has to do with the devil and everything else. And of course, these people here, the Saturnish people, are these satyrs. That's where you get satyr from, and they were known as being the satyrs. So you look at satyrs, and they're half goat people. These people around here were growing goats and doing stuff crazy at the time, coming out of bull worship and into goats. And not really worship of the things, but what they sacrificed and what their God looked like too, by the way. So you're sacrificing to a goat god and everything. And this is the area that Abraham comes into and what he's doing, by the way. Melchizedek was actually one of these Baal worshippers that had all this. So Saturn is known in the area, not from the Greeks or the Romans, and by the name Cronus or Saturn, but he's known by the local name El. And so they even call him Elis. Say that down there he's called Elis. Well, you take the us off of everything like Saturnus, and you end up with El. And El is the god of here, and it's also the god of the patriarchs in the Bible. But I'll get to that in just a second. In astronomy, the planet we now know as Saturn, because of Roman influence, was called Chronus by the Greeks, and the outermost planet, or god deity, was considered the 7th of the 7 heavenly objects that are visible to the naked eye. And so there's your secret 7, but also being the 6th planet, so there's a 6th day situation that goes on with Saturn, the god of the Satyrs. And those satyrs are known as being half goat-looking people because they still wore skins as pants rather than the non-barbaric Romans who eat grapes and all wear all fabric now at this point, right? So they're looked as being a little bit barbaric, and because of what happens in the great wars that happen between the people down there, they kind of smudge them a little bit and turn them into this slightly half animal, still barbaric kind of thing with horns and so on. And by the way, look up Moses with horns, Google image it, and you'll see that whenever they met the entity in Sinai, that Moses came down with horns. There's a whole video on that too, but let's just continue. And how this connects everything all together. It was the outermost planet visited to the naked eye, and so the farthest away. Now there is Uranus, and of course he got disposed here, and so they know that, and of course Enki, who used to be the god of the world, whenever Enlil disposed him, he went out there, and it's stated in the tablets that they have that their holiness and their halo is fading, and today we know after astronomy that they still have slight halos on them, but it's fading and nowhere near what Saturn's super ring is. So how did they know they had this ring of a halo thing, and why are all these gods depicted with having the halo like Saturn has on them if they're deified and they all supposedly come from this Saturn god? This is weird. And it's even shown with the Bible people. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Bible stuff, a lot of it's stolen from the people around him and all their knowledge. It's nothing but more than them equating it and going, oh yeah, well that was this guy, oh yeah, that was this guy. And it definitely looks like it has Roman and Greek influence over it like crazy. In fact, it may have been even compiled and twisted later to have these deities in these positions to make it equate to their standpoint. And there's a big reveal for you. But let's look at this just a little bit more and we'll be through with this one. Saturn has been known since prehistoric times. In ancient times, it was the most distant of 5 known planets, and it's recorded to have a longer time period. It takes around 30 years to go around its cycle. Therefore, it's known as Father Time and stuff, and it's the god that takes the longest time. The fast god is Mercury. He's the closest one to the sun. He goes around as quick. He has this shortest year, and this is the man that has way longer of time. It's looked at as being the fact that when the gods left us, that he had left us and gotten away farther, therefore he was that. But then also in our dome that is above us, he was the Most High. He was known as El ELyon. He was the Most High, and he was also known as the Ancient of Days, which is exactly what's in the Bible about their God, the Hebrew God, El. And so let's equate that El, and let's see if we can't show it to you in the Bible in something that's real simple. After I go through a few more little things here, trying to make it as small as I can, trying to get through it. You can tell I'm rapid talking. In Hindu astrology, there are 9 astrological objects known as Nagravasas. Saturn is one of them. It's known as Shani. We talked about this before. Judges everyone based on the good and bad deeds performed in life. Doesn't that sound similar to? In the 5th century, the Indian astronomer text Surya Siddhanta estimated the diameter of Saturn to be about 73,882. In fact, that's not an estimate. They tried to pin it. An error of less than 1% of what we find today to be reality and our accepted value, NASA or whatever, of 74,580 miles. And there's a few explanations to that, and I don't want to get into it on this video. But it's how it comes closer and farther away, the brightness on it, a few other things. And of course, the ancient Sumerians had for 225,000 years, if you believe the ancient stories, been studying the stars and doing everything, and they knew all about them. And it's where everybody got their astronomy from. Inanna, which was the god after the Great Flood, when they separated all the people into their different areas, was the god over the Hindus. They say you can definitely see the influence that Inanna, the woman, would have over them because of their gods and how glorify, the dress that they wear, and even men and women and Persians and all the way that it looks through there. Whereas if you go to the left, where they don't have any women and they're all, and you come back over here where the women are out of it, you don't see it really anymore. The only places you ever saw the women deified at all is Sumeria, pretty much, a little bit of Acadia. Babylon, of course, had the precursor, and then the Queen of Heaven, which turned into the whore of Babylon, but that's another story too that ties this all together. But it does tie that Sumerian goddess of goodness. Of course, if she's your adversary, then all of a sudden she's just bad. And it's real common. It's real common. You'll be like, oh man, she's so pretty, she does something bad. You're like, that bitch. So it's just, okay. In ancient Hebrew, Saturn was called Shabbatai. Its angel is called chappEL. And there's El on the end of that. And what's funny is, Shabbatai is where you get the Sabbath from, of Saturn, the god of the Satyrs. And Saturday is the 6th day, and that's the old Sabbath that the Hebrews used to worship. So follow me. They're worshiping on Saturn's day, Saturday. That's the reason it's been called that. So, and of course, this was for that satyr god, Saturn, known as El, where there are angels, and their names are things like chappEL, or Ariel, or Azazel, or Gabriel, or Michael, which is Michael, right? And then they have prophets too. So let's look at this. This angel is chappEL. Its intelligence beneficial spirit is EziekiEL, and its spirit darker aspect is Zazel. Well, that's Azazel. And if you look it up, that's the god that the Hebrews used to sacrifice to. That they would give one to God and one to that. That's where the 2 blemished goats are, and then they would, by a process of lots, decide which one went to one god and which one went to the other. Well, Azazel is supposed to be, if you read Enoch, it's the god that had steered mankind wrong, and so why would they be sacrificed? That's not good. Well, and what would they do? Well, they would have a kid walk the goat out and walk it off a cliff, apparently, supposedly, and kill it to Azazel and give one to him and one to this other god. And that doesn't sound right, does it? But, well, they're giving God his due, but they're just not solo God worship at all at this point. In fact, there's a whole pantheon to El with his daughter, who's the flame, and all that stuff. So it never really was a single thing. In fact, whenever they try to turn it into a single thing, they still have a bunch of angels and all these other things, And so it looks just like the Zeus pantheon, where Zeus is over all the other gods, and they do his bidding. It's really no different. And then Catholics have saints you can pray to and do things to, like they're lesser deities, just like in the olden times you used to pray to the tree god for tree stuff, and ground god to ground stuff, and water god if you're going in a boat. And so, and these saints have the same qualities, where anything even down to a toothache, they've got a saint for it. And just like the ancient Greeks had anything down to a toothache. Isn't that odd how you can get all that to eventually come out of that? Well, no, it's not, once you find out the truth. And it's being delivered to y'all. Oh, I think I left this out. Ancient Chinese and Japanese culture designated the planet Saturn as the Earth star. It was the controller of Earth. This was based on the 5 elements, which are traditionally used to classify the natural elements. So that's pretty cool. So Saturn, of course, takes his name from that, and he's the god of agriculture, and this equates him to Ninurta, who ended up having to become a god of grain, and most people equate him to being Marduk, or perhaps even Ares, the god of war. But Ares, the god of war, was actually involved in the Trojan War, and so, like on the zodiac here, wouldn't have been involved in this part, but would have been involved in this part. That's where it happened at. Trojan War, 1700, 2,000 years ago, would have been right before Aries starts, and in between Taurus and Aries, of course, is the sign of the god of war, and that's the sign of all the wars that happened. That was the great wars of men. It's right above his head, if you'll look too, in this symbolism. So they used to worship Saturnalia, or Saturn on Saturnalia in Rome, and Rome's ancient tower, I may have said it in this video, is actually called Saturnus Mons. The Capitol hill in Rome used to be dedicated to this god. In fact, where the Vatican is now was sitting right on top of where they used to worship this god. It really isn't anything different. They just absorbed it in like they did everybody else's, and they put an us on the end of it for themselves, but not anymore. Oh, I was going to do the L thing for you too. So you've probably already figured it out, but look at all the names with L on it. Like BethEL is the house of God, where Beth is the house, and El is the name of God, isn't it? And EziekiEL the prophet, and ELisha the prophet, and NathaniEL the prophet. It gets to the point where it's just silly, and it's the big elephant in your face the whole time. Just standing there and nobody did. But anyhow, so angels, God's council is the Elohim. They worship in a TempEL or a chappEL that has a steep L on top of it. And you open up a book called the BibEL, the Tower of BibEL, the Tower of the Son of El, BibEL. Oh, they're going to make the confusion. Oh, you know what the confusion is twisting words. And I told you a long time ago, out of a twist of words, whenever I was just trying to lead people instead of really getting to the point here, like I am in my later videos here, that by a trick of words, things get changed. And BibEL and all this stuff, and it's not really that big of a trick of words. Today you can look at linguistics and go, wow, okay, all these names like Israel, where Isra means warrior of, or one who wrestles with, and El is the name of God. People. So here's one for you. It snaps. Ninurta was the two-faced god, and they show you a three-faced god here. Why the slight difference? The belief, I guess, is that he's the two-faced god looking left or right. When he sleeps, he's awake. When he's awake, he sleeps. He has two sets of wings. When he flies, he's at rest, and when he's rest, he's flying. He's backwards. Doesn't that sound like the other entity? Yeah. He was imagined as a god, serpentine in form. The bottom half of his body and shown in a lot of things this is where you get all the serpent stuff coming from snake worshipy crap, from the serpents in heaven, and he came from dragons. And so he also had those of a man and a bull and a lion. We talked about his consort was also a serpentine lady named Ananke. She circled a primordial egg, busted the coil egg in her body, or not in her body, but up in space, and it ended up making the Milky Way, and that's where they came out with it. And her children came out of the eggs, and those were all the gods. and they named the gods after the stars and the planets. And they found the constellations and named them after the things and the primordial things that happened. And so above as below. And that's where that comes from. And so he's carrying a sickle like Father Time. He's on that chariot. It's got two snakes pulling the thing, which looks, ironically like all the other chariot pulling across the sky deities and stuff like that. Well, El in that area was known to have been the satyr, Saturn. It's why Saturday is going on, and that's those goat people that they don't like because of the wars they had with them, probably back in the Trojan Wars and before. Repeatedly in the Bible, they say the remnant of them left at the end of it is perhaps all mixed with everybody that's in there, including the Persians. But then the people that were really kind of separating themselves and trying to stay a pure bloodline were the Edomites. When you look up in the Bible, whenever you find that phrase is used there, it's actually pronounced Adamites. That first letter is an A. And that might lead you another idea of lineage too, which is kind of screwed up. And I found out from a black racist that white people are Edomites. And I'm like, why are we got a what? And so I look up to it, and yeah, there's a school of people that are saying these are these, those are those, and everything else. And of course, that's what causes racism, is everybody trying to grab this shit. But of course, the belief is he created everybody. The problem is that in the Bible it says there's pre-Adamitic races that aren't mentioned. And they're referring to like Africans and Asians and people that aren't of the Bible, that all they're talking about the world is only a certain section of people. And that's disgusting too, to show you how the Hebrews, well, it's no wonder the Hebrews said that even though they're only talking about these people, that these people are all Goyim and we're the special ones that chose out of everybody, because our great-great-granddad almost sacrificed one of his kids and he's actually this guy here. And that they were the special race, which just comes out to odd. So the odd thing about his father, Uranus, if you take the us off the end of it, becomes Uran, and the land of Ur that Abraham comes from, and the worship of An, who was heaven, right? And who ended up getting disposed, as we talked about. So that's how you get your Uran from, very close to Iran, there where it is now, which you just pronounce almost the same as Uran is Iran, okay? And people know that the Ur and all that comes from that, and what An is the worship of An. This is the person that's from there. Romans stolen God from that area. You know, they absorbed in everybody's gods because they didn't worship the God of standing up under their feet, but everybody's gods around them that were the major gods made up the pantheon of everything. Well, El had a son named Baal, and it was B-A-E-L, which is son of El, or B-A-A-L is the way it's always written, and it has a little hyphen between the A's, so it's Baal or something like that. Well, if you look up Baal worship, it looks like some 1980s devil worshipping rock and roll music shit with a devil, and it's got a fire inside of it, and they throw their babies into the fire. Look up Baal worship, and you'll see what these Hebrews were doing, where this all comes from, and how El, and El is still the names of all those people. It's amazingly attached. And here's one for you. The ancient Phoenician word for the planet Saturn was Israel. And they knew this in ancient times. Philo of Babylon knew it. They mention it to each other in a few of their old stories and stuff, where they tell you that the original idea of the second coming of Chronus was the fact that whenever he got besieged and the people were trying to kill him, that he ate all of his children and outstayed the army, to where in a time of drought they had to leave. The other story of it from the other side was that during a time of strife, people used to sacrifice their children whenever they would get besieged, and it would say that I'm not going to have an offspring that's going to come up and go after you. And so what they did was they castrated him so he couldn't have any more kids and say it was him, and they sacrificed his only begotten son, Eudud, which if you take the DS switch that goes on between languages right in that end, that's Eusus, and the IU ends up changing into a J after J's get done, and that's Jesus, and that was his only begotten son that he had sacrificed. You can look this up. In fact, where you find it is like Berosus, and he's a he's a scholar that's trying to put things together and actually say that in Christianity, he's forming Christianity whenever he does. Do I have that here? I thought I had it on one of these. I don't. But hey, if you want to know if God had a girlfriend, there is Yahweh in his Asherah. It's a recreation off a real pottery piece that they found, and a few of them. He's got a bunch of flies on him too. And this is Yahweh, and this is Baal, and this is Asherah, his wife. Ooh, and I can tell you what Yahweh and YHWH actually means too. YH is the male third person form of I am, which is like he does. And then WH is the female third person, she does. And so when he says I am what I am, or I am, what I'll be, he's actually saying I am what she was, in a third person's point of view. It's probably enough reveal for today, but there's a lot more to this. Check out a few more of my videos on the subject. Look at the ones on Chronus, Saturn, the white elephant in the Bible staring at you the whole time. I've got one on that, and a lot more interesting facts that attach it all together. And then there's another big reveal coming, where what I've found now is where the Bible comes from, and it has to do with my daughter's new cat. He's a black and white Sylvester, and his name is Titus. Yeah. Funny how things in my life just keep slapping me in the face with this information. I hope you aren't slapped by it, but I want to let you know that there's the God of the Hebrew Bible. He's a cow god, has horns, and whenever Moses has horns, and it's just a cow god. That's the reason they took the image off of him. It's a story of a kid making fun of him and stuff, and they killed the kid over it and started a feud. In fact, a Yudid, which turns into Usus, is Jesus. Actually, in their language, Yudid means feud. And so, like in the Greek pantheons where he had a daughter and they had kids named Jealousy and whatever, and they started attributing all these, thoughts and things to him and show you that that's what brings about this. That's where the word feud comes in, and that's where the entity feud. And it sure is a feud in that area that's been going on for thousands of years. And it's about time for it to all end once people find out this information that ties it all together. Thank y'all for watching. Like if you like the fact that I found this and put it together for you. Subscribe if you will, and send you new stuff going on. Check out some of my other videos. And if you don't like what you learned, I am sorry. Peace.